The ceiling tiles were the same as they had been every night for 2 years. 14 across, 9 down. 126 rectangles of pressed fiber stained yellow at the corners, where the roof had leaked one winter, and nobody had bothered to fix it. Wren Holloway lay on her back in the narrow bed and counted them again the way she had counted them every night since she turned 16. The way she had counted them 3 hours ago, when sleep refused to come, and the way she was counting them now at 5 in the morning, while the rest of the group home slept around her like a house full of strangers. She had been awake a long time. Outside the small window above her bed, the sky was beginning to soften from black to slate. The streetlight on Brevard Street threw its pale rectangle across the floor the way it always did, and the radiator in the corner ticked the way it always did, and the smell of industrial cleaner mixed with burnt toast drifted up from the kitchen the way it always did. And none of it would matter in 7 hours, because none of it would be hers anymore. Today was the day. Wren turned her head toward the wall and looked at the things she owned. They were already packed. A black plastic garbage bag, tied at the top with a knot she had pulled tight twice. A backpack with a broken zipper that she had to clip closed with a paper clip. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear folded into a small square, because folding it made it feel like less. A toothbrush in a sandwich bag. A library card from the Charlotte public system that had been renewed every 6 months by a woman named Mrs. Hollis, who knew her by name. And a single envelope tucked into the front pocket of the backpack containing $41 in bills, smoothed flat against each other. That was 18 years. That was everything. She closed her eyes and tried to remember being 4. She tried this sometimes when sleep would not come, and the dark felt like it was pressing down on her chest. She could almost catch the edge of something. A kitchen that smelled like vanilla. A woman humming a song that had no melody. A pair of hands lifting her up. But the harder she reached for it, the further it slid away. And what she was left with was the same thing she was always left with. A mother she could not remember. A father who had walked out of the room when she was 6 and never walked back in. An aunt who had kept her for 11 months and then driven her to a social services office and signed her name on a piece of paper and left her in a waiting room that smelled like crayons. And then the system. Family after family. Bedroom after bedroom, none of them hers. The radiator ticked. At 7 o'clock, a woman named Karen knocked on the door 3 times, paused and pushed it open without waiting for an answer. Karen was 46 years old and had worked at the group home for 9 years. She had told Wren this once on a quiet afternoon, and Wren had filed it away the way she filed away every piece of information about adults, because you never knew which fact might one day matter. "Today's the day, Wren," Karen said. "You've got until noon to clear out." Wren did not answer. She was already sitting up. Karen lingered in the doorway. She looked older in the morning light, the lines around her mouth deeper than they had been the night before. She held a manila folder against her hip, the way she held all manila folders, and Wren knew what was in it before Karen said a word. Birth certificate, medical records, a list of social services phone numbers printed on yellow paper. The official goodbye of the state of North Carolina to one of the children it had raised but never claimed. "Come downstairs when you're ready," Karen said. "I'm ready." Karen looked at the garbage bag on the floor. She looked at Wren. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, and then closed it again. She nodded once, the small nod of a woman who had done this scene too many times to count, and turned and walked away. Wren got dressed. She pulled on her cleanest shirt, a faded gray cotton t-shirt that had belonged to a foster brother whose name she could not remember anymore. She pulled on jeans. She tied her sneakers, both laces careful double knots. She lifted the jade pendant from the nightstand where it had spent the night and closed it around her neck and felt the small, cool weight of it settle against her collarbone the way it had every day for 8 years. The pendant had been her mother's. A woman named Mrs. Mallory, the 5th foster mother she had lived with, had given it to her on the morning of her 10th birthday, pulling it from an envelope of personal effects that had traveled through the system alongside Wren since the beginning. "This belonged to your mama, child," Mrs. Mallory had said. "She'd want you to have it." Wren had been 10 years old. She had not cried. She had said thank you in a polite voice and walked out of the room and locked herself in the bathroom and pressed the pendant against her chest until it left a red mark on her skin. The mark had faded by morning. The pendant had not left her since. She picked up the garbage bag in one hand and the backpack in the other and looked around the room. The bed was made. The dresser was empty. The window was clean. She had vacuumed the carpet last night when she could not sleep. There was nothing of her left in this room, nothing to suggest that a girl named Wren Holloway had spent 2 years counting tiles and waiting for a day that had now arrived. She walked downstairs. In the front office, Karen slid the manila folder across the desk. Wren took it without looking inside. Karen reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a granola bar wrapped in plastic and laid it on top of the folder. "Take this," Karen said, "and Wren." Wren waited. "Be careful out there." Wren put the granola bar in her pocket. She tucked the folder under her arm. She walked out the front door of the group home into a March morning that could not decide if it was winter or spring. The air was cold, but the sun was out, and it caught the frost on the grass and turned the whole front yard silver for a moment. And Wren stood on the sidewalk with her garbage bag in one hand and her backpack hanging off one shoulder, and felt the full weight of being nowhere at all. She had 18 years of life behind her, and not one person in the world who was waiting for her to come home. She started walking. The Charlotte Public Library was 6 blocks from the group home, and Wren had walked those 6 blocks more times than she could count. She knew which crack in the sidewalk to step over, because the concrete had shifted into a small ridge that caught the toe of her sneaker. She knew which storefront's awning leaked when it rained. She knew which corner had a streetlight that flickered after dark, and which one was always dark, and which one was best to cross at if you didn't want to be seen. The walk took her 12 minutes. The library opened at 9. She was 40 minutes early. She sat on the concrete steps outside the front entrance and waited. The garbage bag sat on the step beside her, like a strange animal. A woman walked past with a dog on a leash, and the dog stopped and sniffed at the bag. And the woman gave Wren a look that was equal parts pity and suspicion. And Wren looked down at her shoes until the woman pulled the dog away. At 9 o'clock, the librarian unlocked the front doors. Mrs. Hollis was 62 years old. She had silver hair that she wore in a low bun, and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and a soft voice that never rose, even at the children who came in after school, and forgot how to whisper. She had been the head librarian at the Charlotte Public Library for 31 years. And in that time, she had watched 1,000 children grow up inside her building. And she remembered most of them. And she remembered Wren more than most. She looked up when Wren came through the door. Her eyes moved to the garbage bag, and the backpack, and back to Wren's face, and she understood everything without a word being spoken. "Today," she said. Wren nodded. "Come sit down. I have something for you." Mrs. Hollis disappeared into the back office behind the circulation desk and was gone for nearly a minute. Wren stood in the entryway with her garbage bag at her feet and watched the morning light come through the tall front windows and fall in golden bars across the carpet. The library smelled the way it always smelled: old paper and floor wax, and the faint trace of coffee from the staff room. It was the smell of the safest place Wren had ever known. Mrs. Hollis returned carrying a white envelope. "This came yesterday," she said. "Addressed to you, care of the library. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but the return address is a law firm." Wren took the envelope. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the kind of paper that cost money. She turned it over. The return address was printed in dark green ink in the upper left corner. Reed and Calloway, attorneys at law. Riverbend, North Carolina. She had never heard of Reed and Calloway. She had never heard of anyone named Atticus Reed. She had never heard of Riverbend, North Carolina. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of typed paper, folded into thirds, and taped to the inside flap was a small piece of cardboard with a brass key fastened to it by 2 strips of yellowed tape. The key was old. The brass was tarnished at the edges. It was the kind of key that opened something solid, something that had been built when locks were made by hand. She unfolded the letter. The date at the top of the page was 3 weeks earlier. "Dear Miss Holloway, my name is Atticus Reed, and I am the executor of the estate of Opal Whitfield, who passed away on July 14th of last year. Mrs. Whitfield was your maternal grandmother. She left specific instructions in her will that upon your 18th birthday, you were to receive full ownership of her property at 412 Sycamore Street, Riverbend, North Carolina, known locally as Opal's Kitchen. The enclosed key opens the front door. Mrs. Whitfield asked that I convey the following message to you upon delivery of this letter. Tell her I never stopped looking. Tell her the door is open." Wren read the letter 3 times. The words did not change, but something in her chest began to change. Something began to crack and shift and rearrange itself the way ice cracks on a river when the spring comes too fast. Maternal grandmother. She had a grandmother. She had a grandmother who had died 8 months ago. She had a grandmother who had died 8 months ago and had left her a restaurant. Mrs. Hollis came around the desk and read the letter over Wren's shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth and stayed there. She did not speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was small. "Riverbend. That's about 3 hours south of here, near the Uwharrie Forest. Small town. I haven't been there in 20 years. I have a grandmother," Wren said. The past tense caught in her throat the way fish bones catch. "I had a grandmother." Mrs. Hollis touched her shoulder. The hand was warm and steady. Wren did not pull away. "She left me a restaurant." "She left you a home," Mrs. Hollis said. "That's not the same thing." Wren stared at the brass key taped to the cardboard. She pulled it free slowly, the tape coming away in 2 long strips. The key sat in her palm. It was heavier than it looked. She closed her fingers around it and felt the metal grow warm against her skin. She had been told her mother's family wanted nothing to do with her. That had been the story since she was old enough to understand stories, repeated by caseworkers and foster parents, and the soft, pitying voices of social workers who sat across from her in offices that smelled like burnt coffee. Your mama's people are gone, honey. There's no one on that side. Nobody to come for you. She had stopped asking before her 7th birthday. You learn early in the system that asking about your family is the same as asking the wind to come back. You stop asking because the asking hurts more than the silence. But here was a key. Here was a key. And here was a letter from a dead woman who had shared her blood. And the woman had spent the last days of her life leaving instructions for a lawyer to find a granddaughter. The world had told her was a ghost. And the story Wren had carried for 14 years cracked right down the middle. And through the crack came something she had not felt in a long time. Something that felt almost like a beginning. I need to get to Riverbend, she said. Mrs. Hollis nodded once. She did not ask any questions. She walked back to the desk, picked up her purse from the bottom drawer and pulled out her car keys. Come on, she said. The Greyhound station is on the way. The ticket cost $28. Mrs. Hollis paid for it in cash from her wallet and pressed it into Wren's hand and would not let her speak. You can pay me back when you're settled, child. Go find out what's waiting for you. The bus left Charlotte at 11:15 in the morning. Wren sat by the window with the garbage bag on the seat beside her and the backpack on her lap, and the brass key in her front pocket, pressing against her thigh through the denim. The bus pulled out of the station and turned onto the interstate, and Charlotte began to fall away behind her, and she watched it go without turning her head. The city thinned. The shopping centers gave way to pine forests. The highway narrowed from 6 lanes to 4 to 2. Red clay shoulders appeared along the roadside. Farmland opened up in broad, flat stretches, broken by silos and church steeples, and the occasional pickup truck driving in the opposite direction. Wren ate the granola bar Karen had given her. She drank from a water fountain at a rest stop in Albemarle. She watched the world change through fingerprinted glass. She did not cry. She did not allow herself to cry on buses. That was a rule she had made for herself a long time ago. Buses were public. Buses were where other people could see you. You did not give other people the gift of your crying. You held it until you were alone, and then you let it out, where nobody could use it against you. 3 hours and 17 minutes after she had left Charlotte, the bus slowed and turned off the highway onto a smaller road, and the driver called over his shoulder, "Riverbend, next stop." The stop was not a station. It was a wooden bench beside a green sign on the shoulder of the main road into town. The bus pulled over, and the door hissed open, and Wren stepped down with her garbage bag and her backpack and stood blinking in the afternoon sun. The bus pulled away. She was alone on the side of a road in a town she had never seen. Riverbend was small. That was the first thing she understood about it. The main street ran for maybe 6 blocks and was lined with brick storefronts, some of them with painted signs, and some of them with their windows soaped over. A hardware store. A diner with a hand-painted sign that read, Loretta's, a post office, a church with a white steeple at the far end of the street. Pickup trucks angled along the curb. Two old men sat on a bench outside the hardware store with paper cups of coffee, and they watched her step off the bus and watched her cross the street and did not pretend they were not watching. She had the address from the letter. 412 Sycamore Street. A woman coming out of the post office gave her directions in a voice that was kind without being soft. 2 blocks down. Take a left. You can't miss it. She walked. The garbage bag bumped against her leg with every step. The backpack pulled at her shoulder. She kept her eyes forward and her chin level the way she had learned to walk through unfamiliar places. And she counted her steps because counting kept her calm. And somewhere around the 216th step, she turned the corner onto Sycamore Street. And she saw it. A single-story brick building on the corner. A wide front window. A painted sign above the door, the green letters faded, but still legible. Opal's Kitchen. Wren stopped walking. The building was old, but it was not abandoned. The brickwork was clean. The window glass was intact. The small concrete step in front of the door had been swept recently, and there was a potted plant beside it, a small evergreen in a clay pot, and someone had watered it. Someone had been taking care of this place. Wren stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building for a long time. A restaurant. Her grandmother had run a restaurant in this town. The woman who had borne her mother and had spent her old age running a restaurant on the corner of Sycamore and Main, in a town Wren had never seen, in a county she had never heard of. 3 hours south of the city where Wren had spent her entire life believing she was alone. She had a grandmother. She had a grandmother who had owned this building. She had a grandmother who had walked through that door every morning for years and turned on the lights and started the coffee and stood in the kitchen behind that window and cooked. She had a grandmother who had died in this town last summer, and Wren had been 3 hours away in a group home counting ceiling tiles, and nobody had told her because nobody had known to tell her. She pulled the brass key from her pocket. The metal was warm from her body heat. She climbed the single concrete step. She fitted the key into the lock. The lock resisted. She pressed harder. She turned slowly. The mechanism inside the door was old, and the brass tumblers had not been disturbed in a long time, and for a moment she thought it would not open. Then there was a heavy click that she felt all the way up her wrist, and the lock gave way, and the door swung open under her hand. The smell hit her first. It was not dust. It was not mildew. It was not the smell of a building that had been closed for 3 years. It was lemon oil. It was lemon oil and old wood, and underneath that the faintest trace of cooking spices. Cumin, garlic, something sweet she could not name. The restaurant smelled like someone had been cooking in it recently, like someone had been keeping it alive. Like someone had refused to let it become the thing the world expected an empty building to become. Wren stepped inside. The dining room was small, maybe 10 tables. Each one was covered with a white tablecloth, and over each tablecloth, a sheet of clear plastic had been carefully laid to keep the cloth clean. The chairs were wooden mismatched, but sturdy, pushed neatly into place. A long counter with 6 stools ran along the left wall, backed by a pass-through window into the kitchen. The afternoon light slanted through the front window and fell across the floor in long gold rectangles, and the rectangles moved slowly as the sun moved. Everything was clean, not just preserved, maintained. There were no cobwebs in the corners. There was no dust on the tables. The floor had been mopped recently enough that Wren could smell the soap. The windows had been washed. The cash register on the counter gleamed faintly under the light. Someone had been coming in here. Someone had been keeping this place breathing while it waited. But it was the walls that stopped her. Every wall was covered in framed photographs. Dozens of them. She took a step closer to the nearest one. Then another step. Then she could not move at all, because in the photograph, a young woman was looking back at her. A young woman with dark hair and a wide smile, and Wren's exact jawline, and Wren's exact eyes. A young woman she had never seen before in her life, but whose face she recognized in the way the body recognizes its own blood. Her mother. The next photograph. Her mother in a kitchen, dark hair, pulled back a streak of flour on her cheek, laughing at something the photographer had said. The next. Her mother in a graduation cap and gown, holding a diploma. The next. Her mother in front of this very building on what must have been opening day. A banner behind her that read, "Grand Opening." The next. Her mother holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Wren stopped breathing. The yellow blanket. She had seen the yellow blanket once. She had been 12 years old. A caseworker had pulled out a thin file at the social services office and shown her a photograph of an infant in a yellow blanket and had said, "This is you. This is the only baby picture we have." And Wren had stared at the photograph until the caseworker took it back and put it in the file and put the file in a drawer that locked. That baby was her. The woman holding the baby was her mother. Wren's legs went soft. She reached out and grabbed the edge of the counter and held on. The whole restaurant tilted slightly around her and then came back into focus, and she stood there with her hand on the cool laminate and her chest heaving, and she made a sound she had not made in a long time, a small, involuntary sound that came from somewhere beneath her ribs. Her mother was everywhere, every wall, every surface, every corner of this room. Her grandmother had turned this restaurant into a gallery of her daughter's life, into a place where her daughter would never be forgotten, into a place where anyone who walked through the door would know who her daughter had been, and that she had been loved. Wren walked along the walls slowly. She made herself look at each photograph. Her mother as a teenager, sitting on a porch railing with a guitar. Her mother in a high school marching band uniform. Her mother as a young woman, standing in this kitchen, stirring something in a massive pot, looking over her shoulder at the camera, with a grin that was so alive, Wren had to look away. Her mother holding baby Wren on her hip in front of a Christmas tree. Her mother sleeping in a hospital bed with newborn Wren on her chest. Her mother, her mother, her mother. In every picture, the woman looked happy. She looked like someone who had been loved. Wren reached the end of the counter where the photograph stopped, and a clean stretch of wall began. There, pinned to a small corkboard, was a single handwritten note on yellow paper. The handwriting was careful. The letters were slightly shaky, as if the hand that had written them had been tired. "This wall is for Wren's pictures when she comes home." The air went out of her chest. She stood in front of the empty wall and she could not move. An empty wall, a literal physical space on the wall of this restaurant, reserved for photographs that did not exist yet, of a life that had not been lived yet, in a place she had not known was hers. Her grandmother had left a space for her. Her grandmother had left a space for her on the wall of a restaurant in a town she had never heard of, and her grandmother had been dead for 8 months, and Wren had never met her. She pressed her palm flat against the empty wall. The plaster was cool under her fingers. She stayed like that a long time. When she finally turned around, she noticed something she had missed when she first walked in. On the counter beside the cash register, propped against a small ceramic vase, sat a sealed envelope. Cream-colored. Thick. The kind of envelope meant for important documents. Across the front, in careful cursive handwriting, someone had written, "For Wren when she comes home." Wren walked toward it slowly. She picked it up. The paper was heavy in her hands. She could feel something inside it beyond just a letter. Something stiff, like a photograph or a card. She turned the envelope over. The seal had been pressed down carefully but not glued. She lifted the flap with her thumb. It opened cleanly. Inside was a folded letter, several pages long, written in the same careful handwriting as the note on the corkboard. And tucked behind the letter was a photograph she had never seen. A woman in her late 60s, silver hair, thin face, standing in the doorway of this restaurant with her arms open wide as if welcoming someone in. On the back of the photograph in pencil had been written, "Opal Whitfield, 2019, waiting." Wren stared at the photograph. The woman in it had her mother's mouth. The woman in it had her own eyes. The woman in it was her grandmother. And Wren was looking at her face for the first time in her life, and the woman was dead, and the photograph was the only way she would ever see her. She lowered herself onto a stool at the counter. She unfolded the letter. The handwriting was steady, but the ink had slight tremors in the longer strokes. The kind of strokes that come from a hand that is growing tired, from a hand that knows it is writing one of the last things it will ever write. My dearest Wren, if you are reading this, then you found your way here just like I always believed you would. I want you to know something before you read another word. You were wanted. You were loved. Every single day of your life, even the days you didn't know I existed. I was thinking about you. Wren stopped reading. She lowered the letter to the counter, and she pressed her hands against her face, and she made the sound again. The same small, involuntary sound from beneath her ribs. She made it twice more. Then she breathed in deeply, the way Mrs. Mallory had taught her to breathe when she was a small girl who could not stop crying. And she lifted the letter and she kept reading. The letter was 6 pages long. Opal had written about a little girl who used to stand on a step stool in this very kitchen and stir whatever was on the stove, whether it needed stirring or not. She had written about a teenager who played guitar on the back porch and sang too loud and burned every batch of cookies she attempted. Until one afternoon at 16, something had clicked, and the girl had started cooking with the confidence of someone twice her age. Della's food was her language, the letter said. She could say things with a pot of soup that she couldn't say with words. Wren turned the page. When your mother died, the letter went on. I thought the world had ended. She was 28 years old. She was my only child, and I was told that you died with her. Your father called me the day after the accident and said neither of you had survived. I believed him because I had no reason not to. I buried my daughter and I grieved for you both. And for a year I could not get out of bed." Wren stopped reading again. Her father had told Opal that Wren was dead. Her father had picked up a phone and told a grieving woman that her granddaughter was gone, and then he had left Wren with his sister and disappeared. She pressed her fingers against her eyes until she saw white sparks behind the lids. She kept reading, but something never sat right with me, Opal had written. There was no funeral for you, no death certificate I could find in the county records, no grave beside your mother's. When I asked your father for details, the phone number was disconnected. I started asking questions, and nobody had answers. That's when I began to wonder. Opal had hired a private investigator, a man named Tom Sheldon out of Raleigh, who charged $400 a month and sent reports that were mostly dead ends. She had written letters to Child Protective Services in 3 counties. She had driven to Charlotte. She had sat in government offices waiting for someone to check records that were sealed or lost or incomplete. She had done this for 14 years. I never found you, Opal had written, but I never stopped looking, and I never believed you were dead. A grandmother knows. I can't explain it any better than that. I knew you were out there, and I knew that one day you would need a place to come home to. So I built one. The letter explained the restaurant. After Della's death, Opal had taken the recipes her daughter had created and refined and scribbled on napkins and the backs of grocery lists, and she had opened a restaurant with them. Every dish on the menu was something Della had made. The cornbread was Della's recipe, the pot roast, the black-eyed peas, the peach cobbler that people drove 30 miles for. All Della's. This restaurant is your mother's legacy, the letter said, and now it's yours. Everything in it belongs to you. The building, the equipment, the recipes, and the love that went into every wall and every plate. Otis next door will explain the practical things. I've left funds to keep the lights on, but the important thing is this. You are not alone. You never were. The letter closed with a single line. The handwriting on this line was shakier than anywhere else, as if it had been the last line written, and the writer had been very tired. I'm sorry I ran out of time, but the door is open. It will always be open. Come home. Wren folded the letter. She held it against her chest. She sat at the counter of a restaurant that belonged to her in a town she had never seen, and she held a letter from a dead woman against her ribs, and she rocked forward and back the way she had rocked as a small child, when she could not be comforted by anyone in the room, and the only sounds in the building were her own breathing and the slow, steady hum of a refrigerator that someone had been keeping running for 3 years. She did not know how long she sat there. When she finally lifted her head, the light through the front window had shifted. The gold rectangles on the floor had moved. The afternoon was older than it had been. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stood up. She needed to see the rest of this place. The kitchen was behind the pass-through window, accessible through a swinging door at the end of the counter. Wren pushed through it and stopped on the threshold. The kitchen was spotless. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under fluorescent lights that flickered to life when she found the switch by the door. A commercial stove with 6 burners and a flat grill sat against the back wall, a double sink, a long prep counter, a walk-in cooler that hummed faintly when she put her hand on the handle. She pulled the door open. Cold air came out. Empty shelves. But running. Someone had been paying the electric bill on a walk-in cooler in an empty restaurant for 3 years. On the main prep counter sat a thick 3-ring binder with a laminated cover. The label on the front read in careful block letters, Opal's Kitchen Recipes. Wren opened it. The pages were organized by category. Soups, mains, sides, desserts, breads. Each recipe was written out by hand, but in 2 different styles. The first handwriting was loose and confident, with notes in the margins like, needs more salt, and double the garlic, trust me. The second handwriting was Opal's careful cursive filling in measurements and cooking times, and occasional notes that said things like, Della never measured this. I watched her make it 40 times before I got it right. 2 women's voices in a binder. A daughter who cooked by instinct, and a mother who had spent the rest of her life translating that instinct into something anyone could follow. Wren turned to the cornbread page. Della's original note was just 3 lines. Cornmeal buttermilk, a little sugar, hot skillet. You'll know when it's done. Below it, Opal had written out the full recipe. 2 cups stone-ground yellow cornmeal, 1 cup buttermilk, a tablespoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. Cast iron skillet preheated in the oven at 400 degrees. Pour the batter into the screaming hot skillet. 20 minutes until golden. At the bottom of the page in Opal's handwriting was a final note. This was the first recipe I perfected. It took me 11 tries. On the 12th try, Otis from next door ate a piece and said, "That's Della's cornbread." I sat down on the kitchen floor, and I cried for a long time. A sharp knock at the front door made her jump. She set the binder down on the counter. She walked back through the dining room. Through the glass of the front door, she could see a man on the step. He was old, late 70s, maybe older. He had a full head of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from hardwood by someone who knew what they were doing. He wore a canvas jacket and heavy work boots. He stood with the slightly bow-legged stance of a man who had spent a lifetime on his feet. His eyes, deep-set and dark under thick gray brows, were fixed on her face with an expression she could not read. She opened the door. For a long moment, he did not speak. "You look like her," he said finally. His voice was rough, the kind of rough that comes from decades of not talking much. "You look just like Della." "Who are you?" "Otis Pendleton. I own the hardware store next door." He paused, studied her. "Well, owned it. I'm retired now, but I've been keeping an eye on this place." His gaze moved past her to the restaurant interior, then back to her face. "Opal told me you'd come. I promised her I'd be here when you did." Wren stepped aside. She let him in. Otis moved through this dining room the way a man moves through his own kitchen. He did not touch anything, but his eyes lingered on the photographs on the covered tables on the counter where Opal's letter still lay open. He stopped beside the corkboard and looked at the empty wall and the note on the yellow paper, and his jaw moved like he was working something between his back teeth. He turned to Wren. "You read her letter?" It was not a question. "Yes." Otis lowered himself onto the third stool from the left, the same way a man sits down in his own kitchen. He did not seem to choose the stool. He sat at it, the way a man sits at the stool he has sat at every morning for years. Then you know the bones of it. She looked for you for a long time. 14 years, Wren said. 14 years, Otis repeated. He said it like he was counting them again. He looked down at his hands on the counter. You hungry? The question caught her off guard. What? Hungry. When did you last eat? Wren thought about the granola bar on the bus, about the water at the rest stop. This morning, sort of. Otis stood up. He moved toward the door. Kitchen works. Gas is on, water's on there. Should be dry goods in the pantry. Opal kept the staples stocked and I've been keeping them current. I'll be back in 20 minutes. I've got some things at my place. He left before she could object. Wren stood alone in the restaurant. She listened to the silence settle. Then she walked back into the kitchen. She opened the pantry door. Bags of cornmeal and flour sealed in airtight containers. Canned goods. Beans. Tomatoes. Broth. Salt, pepper, sugar, baking soda. Basic things, but enough. She pulled the recipe binder to the prep counter. She found a cast iron skillet hanging on a rack above the stove. She lifted it down. It was heavy. The handle was wrapped in a strip of old leather that was dark with use. She set the skillet on the stove. She turned on the oven. Mrs. Mallory had taught her to cook. Not fancy things, just basics. How to make biscuits, how to fry an egg without burning the edges, how to tell when cornbread was done by the sound it made when you tapped the top. Wren had not made cornbread in 5 years. She had not thought she remembered how, but her hands remembered. She measured cornmeal into a mixing bowl. She cracked an egg. She poured buttermilk from a carton Otis had clearly left in the cooler for her, though she had not yet thought about how strange that was. She mixed the batter with a wooden spoon, feeling the resistance of the cornmeal against the liquid. She slid the skillet into the oven to heat. The smell reached the dining room within 5 minutes. By 10 minutes, it had filled the entire building. A warm, golden smell that was equal parts grain and butter, and something harder to name. Comfort. Memory. The smell of food made by someone who cared whether you ate it. Otis came back, carrying a paper bag. He set it on the counter without a word. Inside were 2 jars of homemade blackberry jam, a tub of butter, and a carton of sweet tea. He sat down on the 3rd stool from the left and folded his hands and waited. When the timer went off, Wren pulled the cornbread from the oven. It was perfect. Golden on top, slightly dark around the edges where the batter had hit the screaming hot iron. She cut it into wedges. She set one on a plate. She slid the plate across the counter to Otis. He did not speak. He broke the wedge in half. He spread butter on one piece. He took a bite. Then he closed his eyes. He sat very still for a long time. His eyes closed the half-eaten piece of cornbread in his hand, and Wren watched the old man's face. And she saw something move across it that she did not have a name for. Something that looked like grief, and something that looked like joy, layered together. When he opened his eyes, they were wet. "That's her," he said. "That's Opal." They ate standing up, both of them, the way Wren had eaten in every kitchen she had ever worked in. The cornbread was good, better than good. It tasted like something she had forgotten she knew. They ate in silence until the pan was empty. Otis wiped his hands on a napkin. He stood up slowly. "There's an office," he said. "Through that door behind the kitchen. Opal spent a lot of time in there, especially toward the end. You should see it. Ren followed him to a small room behind the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway and gestured her in, but did not enter himself. The office held a wooden desk, a filing cabinet with 4 drawers, a bookshelf, and a single window that looked out on the back alley. The desk was covered in papers, neatly organized into stacks, secured with rubber bands. A corkboard hung on the wall above the desk, and tacked to it were photographs, blurry and distant, of a girl at different ages. Of Ren. Ren stopped in the middle of the room. That's me. That's you. Where did she get these? Otis shook his head slowly. Public records. School yearbooks she paid people to copy. A grainy picture from a food bank newspaper article when you were 11. Every scrap she could find she pinned to that board. Proof you were out there. Proof she wasn't crazy. Ren walked closer to the corkboard. She lifted a hand and touched the edge of one of the photographs. A school picture. 6th grade. She remembered the shirt. It had belonged to a foster sister and had been too big in the shoulders. Opal had this photograph. Opal had been holding this photograph. I'll leave you to it, Otis said. He paused in the doorway. Ren. She turned. Home isn't where they keep you. It's where someone kept a place for you. He nodded once and walked out of the office, and a moment later she heard the kitchen door swing closed behind him. Ren stood alone in her grandmother's office. She lowered herself into the desk chair. The chair was old, the leather cracked at the edges of the seat. It still held the shape of the woman who had sat in it for nearly 20 years. Ren put her hands flat on the desktop. She did not know where to start. The papers were stacked into categories: tax records, receipts, folders marked with years. She pulled the top folder from the leftmost stack and opened it. Private investigator reports. The earliest one was dated 14 years ago, just months after Della's death. The investigator's summary was clinical. Subject claims granddaughter may be alive despite reported death. Initial inquiry shows no death certificate filed in county of accident. Recommend further investigation. She opened the next folder. More reports. More dead ends. She opened the next folder. Letters Opal had written to the Department of Social Services. Each one more urgent than the last. Form letters that had come back saying her inquiry had been noted and would be processed. Copies of requests filed with family courts in 4 counties. All denied. All unanswered. 14 years of paper. 14 years of a woman sitting at this very desk, writing letters and making phone calls and spending money. She probably did not have searching for a granddaughter who had been alive the entire time, living in foster homes, less than 200 miles away. Ren pulled out the last folder in the leftmost stack. She set it on top of the others. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy, partially faded. She lifted it carefully. It was a death certificate. The name on it was Ren Holloway. The date of death was the same day as her mother's accident. The cause of death was listed as motor vehicle collision. The certificate had been filed by Garrett Holloway, her father. Ren stared at the document. Her own name, her own date of birth. Declared dead at age 4 by the man who had then left her with his sister and vanished from the face of the earth. He had killed her on paper. He had erased her from the one person who would have come for her. He had told Opal that her granddaughter was dead, and then he had made it official, and then he had walked away. The death certificate shook in her hands. She set it down carefully on the desk. She pressed the edges flat with both palms. She read every line again. The signature at the bottom of the page, the county seal, the date. 14 years. Opal had spent 14 years fighting a lie written on this piece of paper. Every investigator who had searched for Wren would have found this document and concluded the search was over. The girl was dead. Case closed. And Opal had refused to accept it. Wren looked around the office, at the stacks of files, at the letters sent and returned, at the corkboard with its blurry photographs of a girl in foster care who nobody knew was being searched for by the only person in the world who had never stopped looking. She picked up the death certificate again. She held it under the desk lamp. She read every line, and in the small office behind a kitchen in a town she had never seen, in the chair of a woman she would never meet, holding a piece of paper that had stolen 14 years of her life, and a grandmother she had never been allowed to know. Wren Holloway began to understand the shape of what had been done to her. Her father had killed her on paper, and her grandmother had died 8 months before she could prove him wrong. The light through the small window faded slowly toward dusk. Wren did not move. She sat at the desk with the death certificate in her hands, and she did not cry, and she did not speak. And the only sound in the office was the slow ticking of a clock on the wall, counting down the seconds of a day that was nearly over and a life that was just beginning. Wren did not sleep that night. She sat at Opal's desk until the light through the small window faded from gold to gray to black. And then she sat in the dark because turning on the lamp would have meant admitting that the day was over, and she was not ready for the day to be over. The death certificate lay face down on the desk, where she had finally placed it, after holding it for nearly an hour. She did not need to read it again. The words were already carved into her, in a place beneath language, in a place she could not reach with her hands. Sometime after midnight she moved. She did not remember deciding to move. Her body simply stood up, and her feet carried her out of the office, and she found herself standing in the middle of the dining room, with her hand pressed against one of the wooden chairs, as if she needed to remind herself the chair was real. The streetlight outside the front window threw a pale rectangle across the floor. She lowered herself into the rectangle and sat down on the cold wood and pulled her knees to her chest and looked at the photographs on the wall. Her mother's face, repeated in frame after frame, watched her from the shadows. Della Whitfield, 28 years old when she died. A woman who had hummed church hymns off-key while she cooked. A woman who had burned every batch of cookies she attempted as a teenager. A woman who had stood in this kitchen at 16 and made a pot roast on the first try that was so perfect. Her own mother had said it was like watching someone remember a language they had spoken in another life. A woman who had been Wren's mother. A woman Wren could not remember. Wren tried to summon her the way she had tried 1,000 times before. She closed her eyes and reached for the smell of vanilla and the hum of a tuneless song, and a pair of hands lifting her up. But the photographs on the wall would not let her have the woman that way anymore. The photographs had given her a face, and the face had taken away the small, private version of her mother she had been carrying for 14 years in the dark, and replaced it with someone real, someone who had laughed, someone who had stood in this very room, someone who had loved her, and who had been taken from her by a man named Garrett Holloway, who had then told the world she was dead. Her father. Wren had spent years hating her father for leaving, years constructing him in her mind as a coward, a drunk, a man who had walked out of a kitchen one morning when she was 6 and never walked back in. She had thought leaving was the worst thing he had done. She understood now that leaving had been the smallest thing. He had picked up a phone the day after his wife died, and he had called her mother, and he had told her mother that her granddaughter was dead. He had said the words out loud. He had let them land in the ear of a woman who had just lost her only child, and he had hung up the phone, and he had filed a piece of paper that turned the lie into something official, something that would stop anyone from looking. He had not just abandoned her. He had erased her. And Maeve had known. Wren had not let herself think this thought all evening. She had pushed it away every time it surfaced. But here in the dark, with the streetlight on her face and the photographs of her mother watching her from every wall, she could not push it away anymore. Maeve Holloway, her aunt, the woman who had kept her for 11 months and surrendered her to the state. Maeve had been Garrett's sister. Maeve had known the lie existed. Maeve had never picked up a phone and called Opal and said, "Your granddaughter is alive. She is in Charlotte. Come and get her." For 12 years. Wren pressed her forehead against her knees. 14 years in foster homes, while a woman 200 miles south spent every spare dollar trying to find her. 7 families. 7 bedrooms that were never hers. 7 kitchens where she had learned to cook and clean and make herself useful because useful children got to stay longer. And the whole time there had been a grandmother who wanted her. A restaurant with her name on the wall. A door waiting to be opened. She cried in the dark. She cried quietly with the discipline of a girl who had learned in group homes that noise meant attention, and attention was never good. She cried for a long time. She cried until the sky outside the front window began to lighten, until the streetlight clicked off, until the first thin gray of morning came in from the east and turned the photographs from shadows back into faces. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. She stood up. Her body was stiff from sitting all night, and her knees popped when she straightened. She walked to the kitchen. She turned on the tap. She splashed cold water on her face until her skin hurt. The fluorescent lights of the kitchen buzzed overhead. The stainless steel surfaces reflected her back at herself. A tired girl with swollen eyes, standing in a dead woman's kitchen. The front door opened just after 7. She did not move. She already knew who it was. Otis came through the dining room carrying 2 paper cups and a small brown paper bag. He set them on the counter. He looked at her through the pass-through window. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how she had slept. "Coffee's black," he said. "Didn't know how you'd take it. There's sugar in the bag." Wren came out of the kitchen. She sat down on the stool beside his. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, and the warmth of it traveled up through her palms into her chest, and she felt something loosen there that she had not known was tight. She drank half the cup before she spoke. "He told her I was dead." "I know. He filed a death certificate with my name on it." Otis nodded slowly. He wrapped both hands around his own coffee cup and looked at the counter and did not look at her. He did not look at her because he knew the way old men sometimes know that she could not be looked at right now. Opal showed me that document 6 years ago, he said. She'd gotten a copy through one of her court filings. She sat right where you're sitting, and she said, "Otis, somebody forged my granddaughter's death." I told her to take it to a lawyer. She did. The lawyer said it would take years to untangle, and even if she proved the certificate was false, there was no guarantee the state would help her find a living child in the foster system. But she kept looking. She kept looking. Otis took a slow drink of his coffee. 14 years of looking for a girl the world told her was dead, and she never stopped. They sat in silence for a long time. The morning light came through the front window and caught the dust in the air, and the building was so quiet, Wren could hear the refrigerator in the kitchen humming through the wall. "Tell me about her," Wren said. Otis set his cup down. Opal was stubborn. That's the first thing you need to know. Most stubborn woman I ever met. And I was married to a woman named Margaret, who once refused to leave a hospital waiting room for 36 hours because the doctors had told her she couldn't see her sister. Opal was worse. When she decided something was true, no amount of evidence was going to change her mind. And she decided you were alive. How did she start the restaurant? After Della died, she fell apart. Stopped going out. Stopped answering her phone. I'd check on her every few days, and she'd be sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by Della's recipe cards, just reading them over and over. Then, one morning about 10 months in, she walked into my hardware store, and she said, "Otis, I need to rent the building next door." I told her it had been empty for 2 years, and the owner would probably sell it cheap. She bought it for $12,000 paid cash. I don't know where she got that money. She never told me. Never asked. And she cooked Della's recipes. Every single one. And she spent a year getting them right. Della never wrote things down properly. She'd scribble some flour and cook until it smells right. Opal had to stand in that kitchen and make every dish a dozen times, 24 times, until she could taste her daughter in it. She didn't cook to fill the restaurant, Wren. She cooked so the smell would carry, so that wherever you were, some part of you might remember. Wren looked at the photographs on the wall, her mother's face young and laughing flour on her cheek. Was the restaurant busy? Packed. Every lunch, every dinner. People came from 3 counties. Opal's cornbread was famous. Her pot roast was the best thing I have ever eaten, and my wife was no slouch in the kitchen. His voice softened a little when he mentioned his wife. Opal ran this place for 17 years. She was here 6 days a week, open to close. Knew every regular by name. Knew who was having a hard time, and she'd slide an extra piece of cobbler onto their plate without saying anything about it. She fed this town like it was her own family. When did she get sick? His jaw tightened. About 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they found it, there wasn't much to do. She kept cooking for as long as she could. When she couldn't stand at the stove anymore, she sat in the office and directed me. I'm a terrible cook, Wren, but she talked me through things well enough to keep the doors open for another few months. And then she closed. 3 years ago this past January. She called me over and she said, "Otis, I can't do this anymore. But don't you dare let this building fall apart. She's coming." I told her I'd take care of it. And you did. I did. Wren finished her coffee. She looked around the dining room at the clean tables, and the washed windows, and the photographs that Otis had dusted every week for 3 years. I need to do something, she said. With my hands. I can't just sit here. Otis studied her for a moment. Then he stood up. Cleaning supplies in the back closet. Mop bucket rags. The floors are due. He left her to it. She found the closet. She filled a bucket with hot water and soap. She started mopping. She began in the kitchen because it felt right. She worked the mop across the tile in long, steady strokes, and the physical motion loosened something in her chest that had been wound tight all night. She scrubbed the prep counters. She wiped down the stove burners. She cleaned the inside of the walk-in cooler, which was empty except for a single box of baking soda that Otis had placed on the shelf to absorb any smells. In the dining room, she mopped every inch of the floor. She moved the chairs aside. She worked around the counter stools. She washed the windows with vinegar and old newspaper, the way Mrs. Mallory had taught her, and the glass came up clean and clear, and the morning light came through, brighter than before. She wiped down each framed photograph, lifting them off the wall one at a time, cleaning the glass, hanging them back exactly as they had been. By noon, her arms ached, and her back was sore, and the restaurant smelled like lemon soap and clean wood. She stood in the middle of the dining room and felt, for the first time in years, like she had done something that mattered. A knock at the door. Wren opened it and found a woman on the step. She was in her early 50s, broad-shouldered with dark hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt and carried a cardboard box that looked heavy. "You must be Wren," the woman said. "I'm Loretta. I run the diner across the street. Otis told me you were here." He did. Otis told everyone. I think he's been waiting 3 years to make that phone call. Loretta shifted the box in her arms. Wren took it from her. It was heavy. Inside were containers of soup and rice, a loaf of bread wrapped in a clean towel, a bag of apples, a sack of potatoes, dish soap, sponges, a package of paper towels. At the bottom was a folded dish towel with a note pinned to it. The note said in careful handwriting, "Opal would be proud. Welcome home." "Thank you," Wren said. Her voice cracked on the second word. Loretta stepped inside without waiting to be invited, the way people in small towns do when they know they belong. She looked around the dining room and nodded once. "You've been busy. This place looks good." She ran her hand along the counter. "I used to eat here twice a week. Opal made a black-eyed pea soup that I have been trying to replicate for 3 years and cannot get right." "It's in the recipe binder," Wren said. Loretta's eyes lit up. "Don't you dare show me. I'm not ready to admit defeat." She paused. Her face softened. "Listen, Wren, I know you just got here, and you are probably overwhelmed, and you probably feel like you owe a lot of strangers a lot of things. You don't. This town cared about Opal. They're going to care about you. Give them a chance." She left as easily as she had arrived. Wren stood in the doorway and watched her cross the street to the diner. A woman who had brought food and kindness to a stranger because someone she had loved had asked her to look out for this place. By Tuesday afternoon, 3 more people had come. A man named Frank, who had been one of Opal's regulars for 15 years, brought a flat of eggs from a farm outside town. He stood in the doorway with the eggs in his hands and looked at the photographs on the walls, and his eyes got wet. And he said, "Lord, she'd be glad to see this." And then he handed Wren the eggs and walked away without saying anything else. A woman named Carol came by with a gallon of whole milk and a pound of butter and said her chickens were laying more than her family could use and that she would be back on Tuesdays. She did not ask Wren anything. She did not look at her too closely. She just nodded once and got back in her truck and drove away. A man from the church down the street came by with a toolbox. He looked at the front door, which had been sticking on its hinge for years, and he said, "I can fix that." And he did. He spent 2 hours fixing the door, and when he was done, the door swung smoothly and silently, and he packed up his toolbox and tipped his hat to Wren and walked back down the street without leaving his name. Wren stood in the doorway after he left and tried to understand what was happening. She had been in this town for less than 3 days. She had not asked anyone for anything. And yet people she had never met were arriving on her doorstep one after another, bringing food and fixing things, and treating this building like it mattered to them personally. Otis explained it simply the next morning over coffee. Opal fed this town for 17 years. You think they forgot that? That afternoon, Wren went back into the office. She had been avoiding the office since she had found the death certificate, but she could not avoid it forever. She sat down at the desk, and she opened the second drawer of the filing cabinet, the one she had not yet touched. The top drawer had held the investigator files. The second drawer held tax records and business documents. The third drawer held something she had not expected: a journal. Black leather cover worn soft at the edges, a ribbon bookmark trailing from between the pages. Wren lifted it out carefully and set it on the desk. She opened it to the first page. The date at the top was 14 years earlier. The handwriting was Opal's careful cursive, less shaky than it had been in the letter. The handwriting of a woman who was younger then, who still had years ahead of her. Started looking for Wren today. Called Tom and asked him to search the foster care records in Mecklenburg County. He said it could take months. I told him I had years. Wren turned the pages slowly. The journal was a record of Opal's search, written in the margins of her daily life. Entries about the restaurant sat alongside entries about dead-end leads and unanswered letters. Peach cobbler recipe finally right. Della would have added more cinnamon. She was always wrong about cinnamon. Tom called. No records in Mecklenburg. Trying Cabarrus County next. A woman came in today with her granddaughter. The little girl sat at the counter and ate cornbread with jam and talked about school. I went into the kitchen and cried for 10 minutes. Filed another request with DSS. Third one this year. They sent back the same form letter. Wren read for hours. The entries spanned years. Some months had daily entries. Others had gaps of weeks, followed by a burst of activity when a new lead surfaced. Opal had written about the restaurant and the search with equal attention. Two halves of the same work, keeping Della's memory alive and finding Della's daughter. And then Wren turned a page and she stopped. The entry was dated 6 years and 4 months earlier. The handwriting was rushed, almost messy. The words crowded together as if the writer had been in a hurry to get them down before she lost them. Went to Charlotte yesterday. Tom got a lead on a school. Said there was a girl who matched the right age range, the right description. He found her name on a class roster. Wren H. The H was all he could read on the photocopy. I drove up that morning, and I parked across the street from the school, and I sat in my car for 2 hours. She turned the page. I saw her Opal had written. The handwriting on the next line was harder to read. The ink had blurred in places, as if the writer's hand had been shaking, or as if something had fallen on the page. She came out at lunchtime with the other students. She was 12 years old. She had Della's hair. She had Della's mouth. She had my eyes. I knew her, Tom. I knew her the moment I saw her. I knew her in my bones the way a woman knows her own blood. Wren's hand was shaking. She had been 12 years old, 6th grade. She had been a 6th grader at East Side Middle School in Charlotte, and she had walked out of that building at lunchtime with the other students, and she had walked across the courtyard to the cafeteria, and she had not known that a woman she had never met was sitting in a car across the street, looking at her, knowing her. She turned the page. I got out of the car Opal had written. I crossed the street. I went to the front office, and I told them I was the girl's grandmother. I had the photocopy of the class roster. I had pictures of Della. I had everything I had been carrying in that briefcase for 10 years. I asked to speak with the girl named Wren H. The next paragraph was the hardest to read. The ink was darker, as if the pen had been pressed hard against the paper. The security guard would not let me pass the front desk. He said I needed to provide documentation proving I was her legal guardian, or proof of a custody arrangement, or written permission from her current foster placement. I had none of these things. I had only my certainty. He told me I could file a formal request through the school district, but it would take weeks, and he could not let me pass the desk that day. I begged him. Begged him, Tom. I am 65 years old, and I stood in the front office of a public school in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I begged a security guard to let me see my granddaughter, and he would not let me, and I left. Opal had written the next sentence on its own line. I was 30 meters from her. I was 30 meters from her, and I could not touch her. Wren put the journal down. She put it down on the desk, and she stood up, and she walked out of the office and into the kitchen, and she gripped the edge of the stainless steel prep counter with both hands, and she did not breathe for a long time. The kitchen was silent. The fluorescent lights hummed. Her grandmother had stood 30 meters away from her. Her grandmother had been in the front office of her middle school, with photographs and documents, and the certainty of her own blood, and a security guard had turned her away because the system that had taken Wren did not recognize the woman who was actually her family. Opal had driven 3 hours from Riverbend. Opal had sat in a car across the street. Opal had seen her granddaughter for the only time in her life at a distance across a courtyard in the company of strangers. And then Opal had driven 3 hours home. Wren did not know how long she stood at the prep counter. Long enough that the muscles in her arms began to ache from gripping. Long enough that she heard Otis come through the front door at his usual time, and she did not turn around, and he did not call out to her. And after a moment she heard the front door open and close again, and he was gone. She went back to the office. She picked up the journal. She kept reading. The next entry was 3 days later. The handwriting was steady again. The voice was different. Quieter. Tom is filing a formal request with the school district. He says it will take 6 to 8 weeks for a response. He says even if they respond, they may not release her records to me without a court order. He says a court order can take another 6 months. He says, by the time we get the records, she may have been moved to a different placement. He says the system is not designed for grandmothers. I asked him what the system is designed for. He did not answer. I have been sitting at this desk all morning. I keep thinking about her face. She did not see me. She was talking to another girl. She was laughing about something. She was wearing a green jacket that was too big in the shoulders. I want to remember her laughing. I want to remember the green jacket. I want to remember that she was Eve and that she was laughing on the day I saw her. I want to remember that no matter what comes next. The entry ended there. Wren sat at the desk for a long time after she finished the page. The green jacket. She remembered the green jacket. It had belonged to a foster sister named Tasha, who had outgrown it. Wren had worn it through 6th grade and into 7th, and then she had outgrown it too, and it had been donated to a shelter. She had not thought about that jacket in 5 years. Opal had remembered the jacket. Opal had been remembering the jacket for 6 years. Wren closed the journal. She held it against her chest. She walked out of the office and into the dining room and stood among the photographs of her mother, and she said out loud to no one in particular, "I'm sorry." She did not know who she was apologizing to. Maybe to Opal, for being too far away, for not knowing she was being looked for not turning her head that day in the courtyard. Maybe to herself, for all the years she had spent believing she was unwanted, when the truth had been driving 3 hours and parking across the street and begging a security guard. She called the lawyer the next morning. Atticus Reed picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice was calm and warm, the voice of a man who had built his career delivering complicated news. "Miss Holloway, I'm glad you called. I need to find someone," she said. "My aunt, Maeve Holloway. She lives in Raleigh." Or she did. A pause on the line. "I can look into that. Opal's file had some information on your father's family. Give me a day or two." "Mr. Reed, can I ask you something else?" "Of course." "My grandmother. Did she ever talk about her search, about what she had found and what she hadn't?" He was quiet for a moment. "She did. She came to my office 4 times in the last 2 years of her life. She brought everything. The reports, the letters, the photographs. The day she came to me with the school visit, she sat in that chair across from my desk, and she cried for an hour and a half, and I sat there with her, and I did not interrupt her. She told me that day, Miss Holloway, that she believed she would not live to find you, and she asked me to make sure you found your way to that restaurant when you came of age. I gave her my word." Wren did not speak. "I will call you about your aunt," he said. The call came back the next evening. Atticus had a phone number. Wren wrote it on the back of a napkin and carried it in her pocket for 2 days before she used it. During those 2 days, the restaurant kept changing. Otis came every morning at 7:30 for coffee. He sat on the 3rd stool from the left and read the newspaper and did not talk unless he had something to say. On the 2nd morning, he brought a toolbox. On the 3rd morning, he brought a man from the church whose name Wren did not learn. They spent 4 hours patching ceiling tiles and replacing the bulb in the back hallway and tightening the legs on 3 of the wooden chairs that had wobbled for years. Loretta brought lunch on Thursday. Chicken salad sandwiches on bread she had made herself. Carol brought another flat of eggs and a jar of strawberry preserves. A retired man named Earl, who had been one of Opal's regulars, came by to fix the painted sign above the door. He brought a small can of forest green paint that matched the original. He stood on a stepladder for 2 hours, and he repainted every letter of Opal's kitchen by hand. And when he was done, the letters were crisp, and the green was deep, and the sign looked the way it had looked the day Opal had opened the place. He climbed down from the ladder. He did not let Wren pay him. "Opal hired me to paint that sign in 1996, he said. "Felt about time I touched it up." He walked away. On Friday morning, Wren pulled the napkin out of her pocket. She sat on the concrete step outside the front door, with the last of the daylight fading, and her phone in her hand. She had rehearsed what she would say a dozen times. None of the versions sounded right. She dialed. The phone rang 4 times. 5. She was about to hang up when a woman answered. "Hello." The voice was cautious, tired. The voice of a woman who had been waiting for a call she did not want. Maeve. Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "Wren. How did you know?" "Because nobody else would call me and sound like that." A long breath. "I've been waiting for this call. I didn't know when, but I knew it would come." Wren gripped the phone. Her throat was tight. "I'm in Riverbend, at Opal's restaurant." "I know about the restaurant. I heard Opal died. I didn't go to the funeral." "Why not?" A pause. Longer this time. When Maeve answered, her voice was flat in a way that Wren recognized. The voice of a woman who had practiced these words alone for years and was finally saying them out loud. "Because I didn't have the right. I knew what your father did. I knew what that woman spent her life doing, and I let it happen. I need you to come here," Wren said. "I need you to tell me why. In person." "And then what?" Wren did not have an answer. "I don't know." "Wren," the voice cracked. "I will be there tomorrow." The line went dead. Wren set the phone down beside her on the step. Otis found her there 10 minutes later. He sat down on the step without asking and looked out at the street. The town was quiet. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The street lights came on one after another all the way down Sycamore Street. "You called her. She's coming tomorrow." Otis nodded. He did not say whether he thought it was a good idea or a bad one. He just sat with her until the last of the light was gone, and then he stood up. "Lock up when you go in. I'll see you in the morning." That night, Wren did not go to bed. She had not gone back to the office since she had found Opal's school visit entry, but tonight she went. She turned on the lamp. She sat in the chair. She looked at the filing cabinet. She had been through the first 3 drawers. The 4th drawer she had not opened. She opened it. It was nearly empty. Just a few folders at the front, mostly old. She lifted them out and set them aside. The drawer was deep, and she reached toward the back to see if anything else was there, and her fingers touched something hard. A box. A small tin box, the kind that had once held cookies or candy. It was pushed all the way to the back of the drawer, as if it had been hidden there. She lifted it out. The lid was painted with faded flowers. The metal was scratched at the edges. She set the box on the desk and opened it. Inside were cassette tapes. She counted them. There were 14 tapes. Each one was labeled in Opal's handwriting on a small white sticker affixed to the spine. For Wren on her 5th birthday. For Wren on her 6th birthday. For Wren on her 7th birthday. She kept counting. For Wren on her 10th birthday. For Wren on her 13th birthday. For Wren on her 16th birthday. The last tape was different from the others. The label was longer. The handwriting on it was shakier than on the others. The kind of shake that comes when the hand that is writing knows it is writing one of the last things it will ever write. For Wren on her 18th birthday. If you are listening to this, that means I am no longer here." Wren lifted the tape out of the box. She held it in her hand. It was small, plastic, a standard audio cassette, the kind people used to make in the 90s before everything became digital. The kind of tape that needed a machine to play it. She did not have a machine. She set the tape down on the desk. She walked out of the office. She walked through the kitchen. She walked into the dining room. She stood at the front window and looked out at Sycamore Street, dark and empty under the streetlights. She thought. There was a thrift store at the end of the main street. She had passed it on her first walk through town. She did not know if it would have a cassette player, but it might. She locked the front door behind her. She walked. The thrift store was closed. Of course it was closed. It was 10 at night in a town of 3,000 people. Nothing was open. She stood on the sidewalk in front of the dark window, and she pressed her face against the glass, and she could see in the back of the store a shelf of old electronics. She could not tell what was on it. She went home. She did not sleep. In the morning, she stood outside the thrift store at 8:45, 15 minutes before it opened. The woman who unlocked the door, a small woman in her 60s with gray curls and a hand-knit cardigan, took one look at Wren's face and said, "Honey, what do you need? Do you have a cassette player?" The woman did not ask why. She walked into the store and went to the back shelf and pulled down a portable cassette player. It was old. It was plastic, faded yellow at the edges with a single speaker and a row of buttons across the top. She blew the dust off it. She handed it to Wren. $5. Wren paid her. She walked back to the restaurant. She unlocked the door. She walked through the kitchen and into the office. She sat down at the desk. She put the cassette into the player. She found the button marked play. She pressed it. There was a click, a whir, a second of soft static. And then a voice came through the small speaker. A voice she had never heard in her life. A voice that filled the small office and that she would remember for the rest of her life. "Hello, Wren. It's your grandmother. It's Opal." Wren stopped breathing. If you are listening to this tape, that means I am no longer here, and you have found your way to this restaurant, and you have found this box, and you have figured out a way to play a tape that is older than you are, which means you are resourceful, which means you are still my granddaughter. A pause, a small breath. I am recording this on a Tuesday afternoon. The doctors have told me I have maybe 6 months, maybe less. I am sitting at this desk where I imagine you are sitting right now, and I'm talking into this little tape recorder because there are some things I want to say to you, and I am running out of time to write them down, and I want you to hear my voice. I want you to know what your grandmother sounded like. The voice was older than Wren had imagined. Steady. Warm. There was a faint southern lilt to it, the soft, rounded vowels of a woman who had grown up in this part of the country. The voice cracked a little on certain words. It was the voice of a woman who was tired and who was speaking anyway. I made other tapes, too, one for every birthday I missed. I made them over the years starting when you were 5. I would sit down on your birthday every year, and I would record something for you. I do not know if you will ever listen to them all, but they are here. They are yours. A longer pause. Wren, I want you to know that I tried. I want you to know that I never gave up on you. I want you to know that the years between us were not my choice, and they were not your fault, and they were not the work of fate. They were the work of one man's selfishness, and they were the work of a system that does not believe grandmothers. The voice steadied. I want you to know that you were loved before you were born. Your mother loved you. She knew you were a girl before any doctor confirmed it. She used to put her hand on her belly and talk to you. She told you stories about me. She told you stories about her father. She told you about the kitchen where she had grown up and the songs she used to hum off-key. You heard those stories. You will not remember them. But they are in you somewhere, the way the smell of a place stays in your clothes after you have left. A small laugh. I am not going to tell you that I have been a Saint Wren. I have been stubborn, and I have been wrong about many things in my life. I was wrong about your mother when she was 16 and wanted to start cooking with cinnamon. She did not understand. I was wrong about your father when she married him, because I knew before she did that he was not the right kind of man, and I did not say it because I thought she would figure it out. I was wrong about a great many things. A pause. But I was not wrong about you. I knew you were alive. I knew it the way I knew the sun would come up in the morning. And I built this place so that when you came, you would have somewhere to come to. The voice softened. The door is open, Wren. The door has been open for a long time. A breath. I am tired now. I will record another tape another day. I love you. I have loved you since before you knew what love was. I will love you after I am gone. A click. The tape stopped. Wren did not move. She sat in the chair, and she stared at the cassette player, and the small office around her was very quiet, and the late morning light came through the window and fell across the desk, and she pressed her hand against her chest, and she made a sound that was not a sob, but was something deeper than a sob, a sound she had never made before in her life. Her grandmother had recorded her voice. Her grandmother had sat in this chair on a Tuesday afternoon, knowing she would not live to meet her granddaughter, and she had spoken into a tape recorder so that someday, somewhere, the granddaughter could hear her. Wren had heard her grandmother's voice. She had heard her grandmother's voice, and her grandmother had said her name, and her grandmother had told her she was loved. Wren put her head down on the desk. She wept the way a person weeps when something that has been frozen for years begins to thaw all at once. When she finally lifted her head, she pressed the rewind button on the player. She listened to it again. She listened to it 3 times. She listened to her grandmother say her name, and she listened to her grandmother say, "I love you." And each time she heard it, something old and hard in her chest broke a little more, and something new and soft began to take its place. Opal was not in the room with her. Opal had been dead for 8 months. But Opal had left a piece of herself behind in a tin box in the back of a drawer on a tape recorded by a dying woman who refused to leave without saying goodbye. She was not gone. She was here. She was here in this office, in this restaurant, in this town. In the photographs on the walls, and the recipes in the binder, and the voice on the tape, and in the granddaughter sitting at her desk, with her tears falling onto the cassette player. Opal Whitfield was not gone. She was the door that was still open. She was the kitchen that still smelled like cornbread. She was the wall that had waited 18 years for a photograph. She was the voice that sat across the gulf of death itself. I love you. I have loved you. I will love you. And outside on Sycamore Street, a car pulled up to the curb. A woman sat in the driver's seat for a long time before she opened the door. Maeve had come. Wren saw the car through the front window before she heard the door close. It was a dusty silver sedan, the kind of car a woman drives when she has driven the same car for 15 years and has stopped noticing it. It sat at the curb with the engine off, and the woman behind the wheel did not get out. She sat with both hands on the steering wheel, and she looked at the painted sign above the door of the restaurant. And she did not move for nearly 2 minutes. Wren stood at the front window with the cassette player still warm in her hand. She had wiped her face with a paper towel from the kitchen. Her eyes were swollen. Her shirt was wrinkled from where she had pressed it against the desk while she cried. She did not care. She had stopped caring about how she looked an hour ago. The door of the sedan opened. Maeve Holloway was smaller than Wren had imagined. She was in her early 40s, but she looked older. Thin, gray at the temples, though her hair was still mostly dark. Deep lines around her mouth. She wore a plain blouse and slacks, and a pair of low heels that suggested she had dressed for the visit, had stood in front of a mirror that morning, trying to decide whether her clothes made her look like someone who deserved to be welcomed. She carried a purse with both hands, the way a woman carries a purse when she is afraid of dropping something. She closed the car door. She did not lock it. She stood on the sidewalk for another long moment. Then she walked toward the restaurant. Wren opened the front door before Maeve had reached the step. They stared at each other. Wren had expected to feel rage. She had spent the last week building the rage, layering it onto the death certificate and the school visit and the 12 years of silence. She had imagined this moment a dozen times since the phone call yesterday. She had imagined herself screaming. She had imagined herself walking away. She had imagined herself unable to speak at all. What she felt was none of these things. What she felt was tired. She was looking at a woman who was already punishing herself more thoroughly than Wren could ever punish her. Maeve's face was the face of a woman who had not slept the night before. Her eyes were red. Her hands shook slightly on the strap of her purse. She had driven 3 hours alone to stand on a sidewalk in front of a restaurant owned by a woman she had wronged, and she had walked toward the door because she had been told to come, and she did not know what was going to happen, and she had come anyway. "You came early," Wren said. "I couldn't sleep." Maeve's eyes moved from Wren's face to the restaurant behind her and back. "You look like Della. Everyone must tell you that." "Come in." Maeve walked through the door slowly. Her eyes moved across the dining room, the photographs, the counter, the kitchen beyond the pass-through. She stopped in front of a photograph of Della holding baby Wren in the yellow blanket. She stood in front of it for a long time. "She was a good mother," Maeve said. "Your mama loved you more than anything in this world. I want you to know that." "Sit down," Wren said. Maeve sat at the counter. Wren stayed behind it. The counter between them felt necessary, a barrier that allowed proximity without closeness, a place to stand while the conversation that was coming made its way through them both. "Tell me," Wren said. Maeve set her purse on the counter. She folded her hands. She looked at her hands while she talked the way people do when the things they have to say cannot be said, while looking into another person's face. "When your father left you with me, I was a mess. My husband had just walked out. I was behind on rent. I was drinking too much. I had not gotten my life together since I was 22 years old, and I was 34, and your father knew that, and he came to my door anyway with a 4-year-old girl in his arms, and he said, "Maeve, just for a few weeks." I told him I couldn't take care of a child. He said it would only be a few weeks. She took a breath. He left. He never came back. I had you for 11 months. When did he tell Opal I was dead? Right after the accident. He called her the day after your mama died. I didn't find out about the call until later, almost a year later. By then, you were already in the system. I had already signed the papers. And when you found out, Maeve's hands tightened on each other until the knuckles were white. I told myself it was too late. I told myself the lie was already done and undoing it wouldn't help anybody. I told myself Opal thought you were dead, and you were already in foster care, and you were better off with the state than with me, or with a grandmother you didn't know. You told yourself a lot of things. I told myself everything I needed to tell myself to keep going, to not have to face what I had done. Her voice broke on the last word. I knew where you were. After the first year, I asked a friend who worked at DSS to keep an eye on your file. I knew when you got moved to a new home. I knew when you started school. I knew when you turned 10, and when you turned 12, and when you turned 15. I never wrote to you. I never called. I never came to see you. I told myself you were better off not knowing me. You knew where I was. You knew Opal was looking, and you said nothing. I said nothing. She looked up for this first time. Her eyes were wet, but steady. I was not strong enough to keep you, and I was not brave enough to tell the truth. Those are two different kinds of failure, Wren, but they are both mine, and I have been carrying them for 12 years. Wren looked at her, the small, broken woman sitting on a stool in a dead woman's restaurant, confessing sins she had carried in her body for over a decade. Maeve was not the villain Wren had constructed in her mind during the years in foster homes. Maeve was not a monster. She was a person who had been handed something she could not carry, and she had set it down, and she had walked away, and she had spent every day since knowing that she should have tried harder. Wren did not forgive her. The word was too large. The word was too final for what she was feeling. But she did not send her away either. "Are you hungry?" Wren said. Maeve looked up. "What?" "I'm going to cook lunch. You can stay if you want." Maeve nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. Wren went into the kitchen. She started pulling things from the pantry and the cooler. She moved without thinking about it, her hands reaching for ingredients with a certainty that surprised her. She set a pot on the stove for soup. She pulled out the cast-iron skillet for cornbread. She started chopping onions, and the burn in her eyes gave her an excuse not to look at anyone for a while. After 10 minutes, Maeve appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stood there uncertain. Wren pointed at a cutting board and a pile of carrots. "Peel those." Maeve picked up the peeler. She washed her hands first. She rolled up her sleeves. She started peeling carrots. She did it carefully, precisely the way someone works when they know they are being given a chance they have not earned. They worked side by side in silence. The only sounds were the knife on the cutting board, the pot beginning to bubble, the soft rasp of the peeler against the carrots. After a long time, Maeve spoke without lifting her head. "Della used to hum when she cooked. Did anyone ever tell you that? No. She'd hum the same 3 songs over and over, church hymns mostly. She couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but she'd hum so loud you could hear her from the porch." Wren kept chopping. "What else?" "She burned everything when she started. I mean everything. Toast, eggs, rice. Opal almost banned her from the kitchen. Then one day, when she was about 16, she walked in and started making this pot roast, and it was perfect. First try. Opal said it was like watching someone remember how to speak a language they'd known in another life. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have been crazy about you, Maeve said quietly. She talked about you every single day. What you'd be like when you grew up. What you would want to do. She had plans for the two of you. Maeve set the peeler down. I took those plans away from her. I know that. I will know it for the rest of my life. Wren did not respond. She lifted the cutting board and slid the onions into the pot. She wiped her hands on a towel. She crossed to the recipe binder and opened it to the page for cornbread. She read the recipe she already knew by heart, because reading the recipe was something to do with her eyes that was not looking at her aunt. Otis arrived at 6. He came through the front door carrying a paper bag. Loretta came in behind him carrying a pie. They found Wren and Maeve at the counter finishing the last of the cornbread, sitting 3 feet apart, in a silence that was not comfortable, but was not hostile either. Loretta assessed the situation in 2 seconds. Smells like Opal's soup. Who's hungry? They ate at the counter, the 4 of them, sitting on stools with bowls of black-eyed pea soup and squares of cornbread and glasses of sweet tea that Loretta had brought from her diner. Otis ate 2 bowls and did not comment on the food because the eating said everything. Loretta told stories about Opal's regular customers. Maeve listened, her soup growing cold in front of her, absorbing every detail about the woman she had wronged. After dinner, Otis and Loretta left together. Otis shook Maeve's hand at the door. He held it for a long moment and said nothing, but his eyes said, "Plenty." Wren walked Maeve to her car. The street was dark and quiet. Maeve stood with her keys in her hand and looked at the restaurant one more time. "Can I come back?" she said. "Tomorrow, for the opening." "It's not a real opening. Just a small lunch. A test." "I know." Wren looked at this woman, at this aunt, who had failed her in every way that mattered, who was standing on a sidewalk in a small town asking permission to be present. It would have been easy to say no. It would have been justified. But Opal had spent 20 years leaving doors open, and Wren was beginning to understand why. "Be here at 11. Maeve got in her car. She drove away. Wren watched the taillights disappear around the corner. She went back inside. She picked up the photograph of Opal from where she had propped it against the register. She held it under the lamp. She looked at the woman in the doorway with her arms open wide. Then she put the photograph back, and she pulled the recipe binder toward her, and she started writing a list of everything she would need for tomorrow. She did not sleep much that night either, but it was a different kind of not sleeping than the night she had found the death certificate. It was the not sleeping of a person with work to do. She made a shopping list. She wrote out a small menu. She mopped the kitchen floor one more time. She placed the photograph of Opal on the counter beside the cash register facing into the dining room, so that on the day the restaurant opened, her grandmother would be looking at the people who came through the door. At 5 in the morning, she stopped working. She went into the small room behind the office where she had been sleeping on the cot. She lay down. She did not undress. She closed her eyes for an hour. She did not sleep, but she rested, and that was the closest thing to sleep she had managed in days. At 6, she got up. She started the coffee. She heated the cast-iron skillet. She mixed the cornbread batter with the wooden spoon that had been hanging on a hook in this kitchen since before she was born. She moved through the kitchen with a focus that shut out everything else, and by 7, the building smelled like cornbread and coffee and onions. And at 7:30, Otis walked through the front door, and at 7:32 he was sitting on the 3rd stool from the left. He drank his coffee. He ate a square of cornbread. He did not speak for a long time. Then he set down his cup. "How many you expecting?" "I don't know. Loretta said she'd spread the word." Opal's record was 63 covers in one lunch service. She ran out of cobbler, and people sat there waiting for the next batch. She was 71 years old, and she made 4 more cobblers that afternoon. "I'm not making 4 cobblers." Otis almost smiled. "You'll make what you need to make." Loretta arrived at 8 with a tablecloth. She said it was extra, but it looked brand new. She helped Wren set the table, smoothing the cloths over the plastic covers, straightening the salt and pepper shakers, adjusting the chairs. They worked without talking much, moving around each other, with an ease that surprised Wren. "I called a few people," Loretta said. "Don't be shocked if more show up than you planned for." "How many is a few?" Loretta did not answer. At 10 o'clock, Wren went outside to sweep the front step. It was a clear, cold morning. The light was sharp. She had the broom in her hand, and she was running it across the concrete when she heard a sound that made her stop. A man was standing on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant. He was about 50 years old. He was thin in a way that suggested he had once been heavier. His face was weathered. His hands were rough, the hands of a man who worked with them. He wore a denim jacket that was too thin for the morning. He carried no bag. He carried nothing. He was looking at the sign above the door. He had been looking at the sign for a long time before Wren had stepped outside. She could tell by the way he was standing, the way his shoulders had set themselves. He turned his head and saw her. Wren stopped sweeping. She did not need an introduction. She had seen his face once in a photograph in the social services file when she was 12. She had not seen the face since. She had not needed to. The face was already in her, in the small mirror she carried inside her own bones, the way every child carries the face of the parent who left them. "Wren." His voice was quiet, rougher than she remembered, though she did not really remember. "You're Garrett." "Yes." She set the broom against the wall. She did not invite him in. She did not move toward him. She stood on the concrete step, and she looked at the man who had filed her death certificate 14 years ago, who had walked out of her life when she was 6, who had let her grow up in a system because it was easier than facing his own family. "How did you find me?" There was an article in the Riverbend paper about the restaurant reopening. A friend in Asheville saw it and called me. "You read the paper?" "I read the paper." A pause. "Wren, I am not here to ask for anything. I am not going to ask you to forgive me. I am not going to ask you to let me in. I came because I wanted to see you with my own eyes. I came because I wanted to know if you were alive." "You knew I was alive." "I knew you were alive somewhere. I didn't know if you were okay." "You didn't know if I was okay," Wren said. "For 14 years you didn't know if I was okay. For 14 years I did not know if you were okay." He did not flinch. He did not look away. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands at his sides, and he let her say what she needed to say. "Why are you here? Really?" He reached into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. He held it out. He did not step forward. This belonged to your mother. I have carried it for 14 years. Wren came down the step. She took the handkerchief from his hand. The cloth was old and worn, but it had been clean recently, as if he had washed it before putting the object inside. She unfolded it. It was a thin silver chain. At the end of the chain was a small silver ring. Plain. No stone. Just a band, narrow, slightly tarnished, at the inside edge. Della's wedding ring threaded onto a chain Della had worn around her neck during the month she was pregnant because her fingers had swollen and the ring would not fit. Wren had not known her mother had worn the ring on a chain. She had not known any of this. She closed her hand around the ring. Tell me why. Tell you why what? Tell me why you killed me on paper. Tell me why you left me with Maeve. Tell me why you disappeared. I am 18 years old, and I have been waiting for you to tell me why. He stood very still on the sidewalk. When he spoke, the words came slowly, as if each one had been waiting in him for a long time and had to be brought up one at a time. After your mother died, I owed money. He stopped. He took a breath. I had borrowed from the wrong people. 2 years before the accident. I had been trying to fix a business that wasn't going to be fixed. I had borrowed $12,000 from a man named Hicks out of Greensboro, and by the time of the accident, I owed him almost 40. Hicks was not a banker. Hicks was the kind of man you do not go to unless you have nowhere else to go, and I had gone to him. He came to me at the hospital, the day your mother died. He came to the hospital, Wren. He sat in the waiting room with me, and he told me the debt did not stop because my wife had died. He told me that if I didn't pay him, he would take it out of my family. He used those words, take it out of my family. There was only one piece of family I had left. Wren did not move. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I sat with you in Maeve's apartment, and I held you while you slept, and I tried to think of a way out. There wasn't one. I didn't have $40,000. I wasn't going to have $40,000. And every day, Hicks was getting closer. He shifted his weight, so I did the only thing I could think of. I filed a death certificate. I went to the county office and I forged the doctor's signature on the accident paperwork, and I filed a death certificate for you. I made it look like you had died with your mother. I told everyone you had died. I told Opal. I told my neighbors. I told the church. I told Hicks. I gave him a copy of the certificate. I told him there was no one left to take it out of. You killed me on paper to protect me. I killed you on paper to protect you. And then I left you with Maeve because I did not trust myself to keep you alive. I did not trust that Hicks would not figure out the truth eventually. I did not trust that I would not lose you the way I had lost your mother. And Maeve was the only person I knew who would never speak my name again. I left you with her, and I disappeared because I was afraid. I was afraid every day for 14 years. You could have come back. I could have come back. I should have come back. I told myself you were better off without me. I told myself you would never know any of it. I told myself a lot of things, Wren. They were all lies. I was a coward. I have been a coward for 14 years. He looked at the ground. I am still a coward. I am here because I read in a newspaper that you were alive, and I needed to see you, and that is the only reason. I am not asking for anything from you. I am not asking to be your father. I lost the right to ask for that a long time ago. Wren stood with the silver ring in her hand. Her father stood 3 feet away from her, a much she had spent 14 years building in her mind as a coward, and a drunk, and a man who did not love her. A man who was in fact all of those things, and who had also done one impossible, terrible thing because he had been terrified, and who had carried his cowardice in his body for 14 years, until it had eaten him from the inside out. She did not forgive him. She did not know if she ever would, but she could see now what he was. He was not a villain. He was a small man who had made a small man's choice, and the choice had broken a great many things, and the breaking could not be undone. She did not hug him. She did not invite him inside. She closed her hand around her mother's ring. She looked at him. "There's a lunch service today, at 11. You can come in if you want, but you sit at the back table, and you do not speak to me, and when it is over, you leave, and then we will see." Garrett's eyes filled with water. "Yes, that is more than you deserve. Yes." She turned. She picked up the broom from where it leaned against the wall. She went back into the restaurant. She did not look behind her. Inside, Otis was watching from the third stool. He had heard everything through the open door. He did not speak. He looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup, and his eyes were full of something she did not have a name for, and he nodded once. She put her mother's ring in the pocket of her apron. She went to the kitchen. She started the next batch of cornbread. At 11 o'clock, Wren unlocked the front door and propped it open. The spring air came in cool and sweet, carrying the smell of cut grass from somewhere down the street. She stood in the doorway and looked out at Sycamore Street. It was Saturday morning. The town was awake but unhurried. An older couple walked past on the sidewalk, and the woman stopped. "Is this place opening again?" "Yes, ma'am." The woman grabbed her husband's arm. "Frank, Opal's Kitchen is opening." She turned back to Wren. "We will be right back. We are getting our daughter." They were the first. By 11:30, 12 people were sitting at the tables. By noon, 18. By 12:15, the dining room was full, and 3 people were standing along the front window waiting for tables to open. Wren had not expected anything like this. She had expected 10 people, maybe 12. She stood behind the counter and counted heads, and felt her chest get tight. But it was not panic. It was something else. Some of these people Wren had never seen. Others she recognized from the past week. Frank from the eggs, Carol from the milk, Earl who had repainted the sign, the man from the church who had fixed the door. They had brought their wives and their husbands and their grown children. They sat at the tables Wren had set that morning, and they read the small, handwritten menu Wren had taped to a board, and they ordered cornbread and black-eyed pea soup and pot roast and peach cobbler, and they did not order timidly. They ordered like people who had been waiting 3 years to eat in this room again. Maeve worked the kitchen. She wore an apron she had brought with her in her car. She washed dishes. She plated soup. She carried trays from the pass-through to the dining room with the careful concentration of a woman who had not waited tables in 25 years and who was determined to do it correctly. She did not speak to the customers. She did not introduce herself. She set the plates down and she retreated, and the customers did not ask who she was because they were focused on the food. Loretta worked the front of the house. She greeted customers at the door. She seated them. She brought them water. She told them about the menu in the easy way of a woman who had spent 30 years running a diner across the street. Otis sat at his stool. He did not help. He drank coffee. He watched. Wren cooked. She cooked the way she had practiced cooking in the kitchen of a foster home at 15, when Mrs. Mallory had finally let her use the stove unsupervised. She cooked the way she had imagined cooking, when she lay on the cot in the group home, counting ceiling tiles. She cooked with her grandmother's recipes open on the prep counter, and her mother's ring in the pocket of her apron, and the photograph of Opal propped on the windowsill, where she could see it from the stove. The plates came back empty. A man at table 4 ate his pot roast in complete silence. When he was done, he sat back, and he set down his fork, and he said to no one in particular, "That's Della's pot roast. I'd know it anywhere." The woman beside him put her hand on his arm. They sat there together, eating cobbler, remembering. At 12:40, Garrett came in. Wren saw him from the kitchen. He came in slowly. He took off a baseball cap she had not noticed him wearing earlier and held it in both hands. He did not approach the counter. He did not approach the kitchen. He looked at the dining room full of people, full of light, full of the smell of his dead wife's recipes. He walked to the back corner. He sat at the small two-top table by the window. He did not look at the photographs on the walls. Loretta saw him sit down. She glanced toward the kitchen. Wren met her eyes through the pass-through and nodded once. Loretta brought him soup. She did not speak to him. She set the bowl down. She brought him cornbread. She brought him a glass of water. She moved away. Garrett ate slowly. He ate the soup his mother-in-law had perfected from his wife's notes. He ate the cornbread his wife had been making since she was 16 years old. He ate them carefully the way a man eats food that he is not sure he has the right to eat. He did not cry, but his face moved in small ways that suggested crying was happening somewhere inside him, in a room he was not allowing anyone to see. He finished. He did not order anything else. He sat with his hands folded on the table. Around 1 o'clock, the front door opened, and Wren almost did not notice her at first. A young woman walked in. She was maybe 16. Thin, wearing a jacket too light for the weather. She stood just inside the door and looked around with the wide, careful eyes of someone assessing whether a place was safe. Wren stopped. She recognized the look instantly. She had worn it every time she had walked into a new foster home. She had worn it on the morning she had stepped off the bus in Riverbend less than 2 weeks ago. The girl did not sit down. She stood near the door, her hands shoved in her pockets, her eyes moving from the photographs to the counter, to the kitchen, passed through and back. She looked at Wren. She looked at the menu on the board. She looked at the door behind her, as if calculating whether she should leave. Wren came out from behind the kitchen counter. She wiped her hands on her apron. She crossed the dining room to the front door. "You hungry?" The girl nodded. "Sit wherever you want." The girl chose the stool at the far end of the counter, the one closest to the door, the one closest to escape. Wren brought her a bowl of soup and a thick square of cornbread and a glass of sweet tea. She set the food down without ceremony. She did not ask any questions. She went back to the kitchen. She had been that girl enough times to know that what you need first is food, and what you need second is to be left alone to eat it. The girl ate everything. She ate slowly at first, then faster. The way people eat when they are not sure where the next meal is coming from. When the bowl was empty, Wren refilled it without being asked. The girl ate the second bowl too. When she finished, Wren sat down on the stool beside her. "What's your name?" "Sage. Sage what? Just Sage. She held her hands flat on the counter. They were small hands. The knuckles were red from the cold. Her nails were bitten down. She did not look up. I'm from Albemarle. I'm staying with a cousin, but she's not home much. I saw the sign yesterday when I was walking. I just wanted to see what it smelled like inside. How did it smell? Like food. Good. Wren looked at her. At this girl with her thin jacket and her careful eyes and her elbows on the counter of a restaurant she had walked into because the door was open and the food smelled good, and she had nowhere else to be on a Saturday afternoon. I'm going to need help around here, Wren said. Washing dishes, sweeping floors. Can't pay much yet, but you get fed. Sage's eyes widened. You serious? I'm serious. Come by Monday after school. I don't go to school. Then come by Monday in the afternoon. The girl nodded. She did not say thank you. She slid off the stool. She took her glass of sweet tea with her. She walked out of the restaurant. Wren watched her go. She felt Otis watching her from his stool. She did not turn around. She did not need to. She knew what he was thinking because she was thinking the same thing. A door was open, and someone had walked through it. Just like Opal had said. The lunch service wound down slowly. People finished eating in 2s and 3s. They came up to the counter and they paid in cash, and they shook Wren's hand, and they told her the food was good, and that Opal would have been proud, and that they would be back. By 2:30, the dining room was empty. Garrett got up from the back table. He carried his bowl and his plate to the pass-through window. He set them down. He did not approach Wren. He did not say anything. He put his baseball cap back on. He looked at her across the empty dining room for one long moment. Then he walked out the front door. Wren watched him go through the front window. He stopped on the sidewalk outside. He stood there for a moment looking back at the restaurant. He nodded once to no one in particular. He walked away down Sycamore Street, and she did not know if she would ever see him again. She did not know what she wanted. Maybe she would see him again. Maybe she would not. Maybe in a year she would write him a letter. Maybe she would not. The decision did not need to be made today. She had let him eat in her grandmother's restaurant. That was today's decision. That was enough. Otis and Loretta and Maeve stayed. They cleaned up together. They washed the last of the dishes. They wiped down the tables. They turned the chairs upside down on the tabletops, the way Loretta said Opal had always done at the end of a service. By 4 o'clock, the dining room was clean, and the kitchen was clean, and the sun was starting to slant in long golden bars across the floor again, the way it had on the afternoon Wren had first opened the door. Otis stood up from the stool. He stretched his back. I'll bring a camera tomorrow. A camera. For the wall. He nodded at the empty wall by the corkboard. Wren looked at it. She had not thought about it all day. The wall had been empty for 18 years, waiting for photographs of a granddaughter who had finally come home. Tomorrow, she said. Otis tipped his hat. He walked out the front door. Loretta hugged her. She did not say much. She walked across the street to her diner. Maeve lingered. She stood in the doorway with her purse in her hands. Her eyes were tired, but the look in them was different now. Less afraid. Same time next Saturday. Same time. Maeve nodded. She walked to her car. She drove away. Wren stood alone in the dining room. She walked slowly through the empty space. She ran her hand along the back of each chair. She looked at the photographs on the walls. Her mother at 16. Her mother holding her as a baby. Her mother in the kitchen with flour on her cheek. She stopped in front of the empty wall. She thought about Sage. She thought about Garrett. She thought about Maeve. She thought about Otis and Loretta and Frank and Carol and all the people who had walked through the door today because Opal had fed them once and they had remembered. She thought about her grandmother sitting at the desk in the office recording a tape into a small machine, knowing she would not live to meet her granddaughter saying the words anyway. The door is open. The door has been open for a long time. Wren walked into the office. She sat down at the desk. She pulled a clean sheet of paper from the printer. She picked up a pen. She wrote, "Dear Grandma, my name is Wren. I am your granddaughter. I am sorry it took me so long to get here. The door was open just like you said. The recipes are in the binder. The photographs are on the wall. Otis is at the counter every morning. Loretta is across the street. Maeve came back. My father came back too, though I do not know yet what to do with him. The town remembers you. I remember you too, even though we never met. I remember you because you left yourself in every corner of this place, in every recipe, in every photograph, in every letter you wrote, in the tape you recorded for me. You looked for me for 14 years. I am here now. I came home. There is a girl named Sage. She is 16. She walked through the door today because she was hungry. I gave her food, and I offered her a job. I do not know what will come of it, but I know what you would have done. You would have left the door open. So I left it open." She folded the letter. She placed it in the filing cabinet in the drawer, with Opal's journal beside the 14 years of investigator reports and court filings and unanswered letters. One more piece of paper in a drawer full of them. But this one was different. This one was an answer. She closed the drawer. She went out to the dining room. She turned off the lights. She walked through the kitchen one last time and made sure the stove was off and the cooler was running. She locked the back door. She walked to the front door and stopped. She looked at the dining room in the dim light, the photographs of her mother, the empty wall waiting for the photograph Otis would bring tomorrow, the third stool from the left where an old man sat every morning at 7:30, the corner table where a man had eaten lunch today for the first time in 14 years. She turned the deadbolt. The lock clicked. She walked back to the small room behind the office. She lay down on the cot. She reached for the cassette player on the floor beside the bed. She pressed play. Her grandmother's voice filled the small room. "Hello, Wren. It's your grandmother. It's Opal." Wren closed her eyes. On the nightstand beside the bed sat the brass key and the jade pendant and her mother's silver ring on its thin chain. 3 small objects from 3 different women. 3 women who had loved her before she had known she was loved. One she had never met. One she could not remember. And one she had been told all her life did not exist. She listened to the tape until it ended. She rewound it. She listened again. Outside the small window, the streetlight on Sycamore Street came on. The town settled into its quiet evening. A car drove past somewhere in the distance. A dog barked. The wind moved through the leaves of the small tree behind the restaurant, the tree Opal had planted 19 years ago when she opened the place, and the leaves whispered against the side of the building. In the morning, Otis would come at 7:30. He would sit on the third stool from the left. She would pour him coffee. He would bring a camera. In the afternoon, Sage would come. She would wash dishes. She would eat dinner standing at the prep counter, the way Wren had eaten in every kitchen she had ever worked in. On Saturday, Maeve would come back. They would cook together in silence, the way silent women learn to be in the same room. And someday, maybe in a week, maybe in a year, the door would open again, and someone else would walk through it. A girl with a garbage bag. A man who had been gone too long. A woman who had heard there was a place in Riverbend, North Carolina, where the food tasted like memory, and the door was always open. Wren Holloway lay on her cot in the back of her grandmother's restaurant. She listened to her grandmother's voice say her name one more time. She fell asleep. The door was locked, but it was not closed. It would never be closed, not while she was alive to open it.